I waited to make a video until after AMD's actual reveal announcement, hoping there would be some additional information compared to what was given to media ahead of time, and there was. They delivered with a slide comparing directly against the 5070 Ti, which is pretty interesting. They're admitting that it's 2% slower in their 30-game average. By the way, this is not independent testing. This is AMD's numbers, meaning they can select the game choices here. Now, to their credit, though, they are choosing a number of ray tracing titles to include in this 30-game average. I think if they had just focused on rasterized performance, then they would have shown a small lead over the 5070 Ti, at least based on these numbers, because in their ray tracing performance numbers, they are showing a loss. However, the loss isn't as massive as it could be. Now, I'd love to know what specific settings they were using in Cyberpunk here. If this was RT Ultra, then this isn't too bad, honestly. Like this might be playable. 19% slower than the 5070 Ti at some pretty heavy-duty ray tracing. The point is, AMD made a big deal out of their focus on ray tracing improvements in the actual hardware. I think that's gonna be huge, because even if you've been blowing off ray tracing as like I just don't care. I know a lot of comments on my videos, I just don't care about ray tracing. It just hurts my performance. We're starting to see more and more games where ray tracing is mandatory. The game engine is just designed to do its lighting through ray tracing. And I think as we move into the next console generation, that will become more and more common. So I do think if you're launching a product now, which could get carried into use years into the future, I do think that if you're ever going to start taking ray tracing seriously, this was definitely maybe a little late, but at least the time to get it done. You wouldn't want to delay to wait any longer. So AMD is claiming that they will be 2% slower than the 5070 Ti. So, on par. Looks like a little better in raster, a little worse in ray tracing. But again, third-party testing needed to do this. Now, they're claiming this is at $150 less. Like, he specifically says performance for $150 less. So, in other words, AMD has officially updated their pricing strategy. Instead of NVIDIA minus $50 MSRP and then discounting it $100 later, now they're just going to do $150 less at the start. But is that good enough? Well, AMD is claiming that in their set of games, that puts them at 23% better performance per dollar. Now, this feels a little bit, similar to what we've seen before, I guess. AMD has often offered, an improvement in performance per dollar compared to NVIDIA counterparts, with the caveats in a lot of features and things like that. This might be a little bit better when compared against the MSRP than usual, but not by much. It would have been a lot more exciting to see a much more aggressive, 30% better performance per dollar. But at the same time, you're comparing the 9070 XT against the 5070 Ti here, which, makes sense because it seems like they're targeting that performance level. But there's another way of looking at this, which is if 9070 XTs are actually available for $599, which is the MSRP AMD went with here, well, they're actually closer in price to a 5070. So I think a lot of people's questions are starting to are maybe going to be looking at, well, I was going to buy a 5070, but I can't actually find one at MSRP because, we'll see what happens with the 5070. But so far, the 50 series at MSRP has been a bit of a myth. They do exist, but in very small quantities. So I think the question, when I do my head-to-head comparisons here, I think it makes sense to ask the question, is it worth spending the extra $50 on the 9070 XT? I'll be very interested to see if the ray tracing improvements for the 9070 XT actually allows it to, maybe it's slower than the 5070 Ti in ray tracing. Is it going to be faster or at least reasonable match for the 5070? Because if you could imagine a card that matches the 5070 in ray tracing and then destroys it in rasterized performance, And if it actually has supply available at MSRP, which big question mark there, and the 5070 doesn't, then I could actually see the 9070 XT being an interesting upsell compared to the 5070. But speaking of upsells, and the 9070 XT being a little bit of a $50 upsell, that's how this whole thing feels when compared with the other AMD GPU they're talking about today, because they have the 9070 coming in, which they are claiming is coming in 21% faster at 4K compared to the 7900 GRE. When you go ahead and look at 1440p results, they're showing 20% faster, which I think will be a more common resolution for these types of GPUs, but it's coming in at 549, in other words, 550. So the GPU prices here are 550 and 600. Now, that's really weird pricing, and what it tells me, at least based on the performance figures that they're doing here, is that they probably were originally planning the 9070 XT to be more like 650 or even 699. And again, it sounds like when they mention pricing here, you can feel a little bit of an audio edit during the presentation. Because here's the thing, 600 divided by 550 is, about 10%. So more money. In other words, it's really about 9%. So what they're saying here is there's about a 9% price difference between the 970 and the XT version, which just feels bizarrely close given the difference in performance that they're claiming. Because again, they give us some comparison points here, with this being 20% faster than the 7900 GRE, and then they tell us that the that's at 1440p. Let's see, I think they gave 4K data on both, so they have said 21% faster at 4K, and then if you jump to the 9070 XT, they're saying 42% faster if we use the 4K data. Well, if you do 1.42 divided by 1.21, you get 17%-ish. In other words, the 9070 XT seems to be offering 17% more performance for 9% more money. Now, usually in a GPU product stack, the higher end cards offer worse performance per dollar, not better. So with this pricing structure, it seems like there's no reason to buy the 9070. Because if you're asking yourself, would it be worth the extra $50 to get the XT version, if that ends up being the actual pricing gap in the real world market, because that's, again, big elephant in the room, then the answer would be it's absolutely worth the extra $50 to get the 9070 XT when comparing the 9070 and its XT version. So this pricing structure feels bizarre. Again, I think if they had been targeting 650 and 550 initially and changed their mind due to media pushback, then the pricing and performance numbers match up. Because if you do 650 divided by 550, you get an 18% price increase, and what they're claiming is about a 17-point-something% performance increase, meaning the performance per dollar increases would scale perfectly if it was 650, 550. But yeah, it seems like they did target that 599 to be a little more aggressive on pricing. But again, the question is it aggressive enough? Well, like I said, I think the interesting thing about this price point is it does put the NVIDIA competition to be more of the 5070 rather than the 5070 Ti. In other words, you could read this as offering, similar to 5070 Ti performance for about a 5070 price. But again, real-world market pricing is going to dictate a lot, because right now we're talking MSRP versus MSRP. If NVIDIA cards start becoming available in more supply at MSRP, then I think that this price point isn't awful for AMD. I'm just not sure it's the massively aggressive price that would just make everybody drop everything and buy this. Why are you even considering NVIDIA? In other words, if they want to gain massive market share, comparing MSRPs here, it's not bad, but I think it could have been better. Like what if the 9070 XT really was just 550 and they dropped the 9070 back to like 499 or even, 450, something like that. But the reality of the situation is currently 50 series cards are nowhere near MSRP. We haven't seen the 5070 launch yet, but hopefully we will soon. And the point is, like, hopefully there will be cards available at that time. If the 5070 is not really available at MSRP, then and the AMD cards are available at MSRP, then they're actually going to look exciting, at least in the market during whatever time period it takes for NVIDIA's MSRPs to actually become available, if they ever do. So if you look at this as, imagine these actually show up at launch in good supply. And speaking of supply, these have been being shipped to retailers, I think a few units in December, a lot more in January. Like, these have had a while to build up supply. So if supply on these is actually good enough that they can be around their MSRP targets during a time period where NVIDIA cards are astronomically higher, then this will look pretty good. So I could see myself when I'm doing my monthly what's the best GPU to buy at the actual prices they're available at videos, I could see these performing well if they're in stock at or near MSRP and NVIDIA cards are just nowhere near there. Again, especially with their focus on becoming more competitive in ray tracing, and their focus on becoming better at other areas they were lacking. FSR4 is a big one. They didn't get us a lot of image quality comparisons here, so I think the best image quality comparisons are still what was available at CES from places like Digital Foundry and Hardware Unboxed, who were able to like film a screen with a camera showing a demo, but the demo looked pretty good. So again, they're going to have a bit of a disadvantage in game support just because that their switch to an upgradable API happened with FSR 3.1. So FSR 4 seems to be just taking the FSR 3.1 games and then at a driver level toggle, basically allowing an upgrade feature to use the newer FSR 4 algorithm. That seems to be the way it's being described. So with that in mind, you want lots of FSR 3.1 titles. The problem is there's lots of games that got FSR 2 support or even the initial FSR 3 support, but have never been upgraded to FSR 3.1. And if they haven't been, then you can't just immediately drop in FSR 4. So FSR 4, image quality, early shots look pretty good, whether it matches DLSS or not. It looks like it's a big improvement over FSR 3.1. But like I said, probably available in less games than DLSS. Hopefully that starts to grow quickly. And at least now they have moved to an upgradable API. It means that any game targeting FSR 3.1 support should also then be very easy or even automatic to target FSR 4 support. So there is that. There's a bunch of other things that they talked about here. Was talking about a focus on improving other areas that AMD has been criticized for in the past, meaning it really looks like they're taking to heart all of the criticisms that have been given against like reasons not to buy AMD. And it seems like they're trying to target those. So for example, they're talking specifically about AMD software and drivers and a new AI-optimized internal test process, increasing hardware test configurations, additional reporting tools, additional beta tester programs. So they're making a big deal out of this in the big announcement, as well as the media pre-briefing I had access to, where they're saying they're really upping their driver stability testing. So they're wanting to make that a big push point. So that, and again, that's something that AMD has been criticized for in the past. Also, when they're talking about their goals of performance improvements within the compute unit, what they're showing here on this slide is while they are per compute unit, which is kind of nice, so they're showing the improvements per compute unit, versus RDNA 2 versus RDNA 3 versus RDNA 4, so RDNA 2, RDNA 3, RDNA 4, they're showing that they are improving rasterization performance per compute unit, as well as ray tracing performance. But notice that going from RDNA 2 to RDNA 3, the ray tracing and the rasterization improvements were kind of in lockstep. You got about the same gain. Whereas going up to RDNA 4, we're getting a noticeable jump to rasterization, but an even larger jump to ray tracing. So it seems like they are targeting that hardware deficiency to try to gain performance. Because if they kept just gaining the same amount of rasterization and ray tracing, then they're not likely to actually catch up to where NVIDIA's at with that. Not that they're catching up right now, but it's accelerating in that ray tracing area. So again, it looks like they're meaningfully targeting the places that they have been behind the competition. Also, they're talking about machine learning support, and this is specifically FP16 dense matrix. I'm not super into machine learning stuff myself, so I can't tell you if they're cherry picking a result here or something. But basically looking like they're even more expanding on that support as well, which is how they're able to do the FSR4 machine learning algorithm, and that would be the justification for why it wouldn't support the older hardware, which seems to be the case, at least for now. They would probably have to develop a fallback version of less quality if it was going to support older stuff. Now, this is interesting as well. Speaking of their targeting places that they have been behind the competition, AMD actually showed off a path tracing demo. That's kind of, if you're think about AMD versus NVIDIA, you might not have expected a path tracing demo from AMD, but they are showing that off here. And along with it, they're showing off how they're trying to target that. Like, how are they getting there? So they're showing that path tracing in and of itself has, you really can't trace enough rays in real time to get a good image just from the path tracing itself. So they're showing using Restir and neural radiance caching to build up more data. And then they're showing off a neural denoiser. So another place where AMD has been behind the competition is ray reconstruction from NVIDIA, being a denoising and upscaling algorithm specifically for these heavy ray tracing workloads. They're showing off an AMD neural denoiser here in kind of a cool demo. Now, one issue is that the video quality on this is just awful. So like, I don't know how much we can get out of that, but they are showing off a path tracing demo here and how all of their technologies stack to get a good real-time path tracing image. However, this video quality overall, I don't know if they'll release a higher res version of this separately maybe to take a look at. It's just a live streaming compression artifacts are so bad that you can't really make out a lot of detail in it. But they're making a big deal out of a path tracing improvement here. So it's looking like they're targeting some major improvements in areas that they have been told they are lacking in, or that shows up in reviews. And so that's all seems like a good thing. I think they're targeting, making a lot of good targets. Oh, also another place they've been behind NVIDIA is in live streaming encoding at low bit rates, the video quality, and they are claiming 25% improvement in, I forget the name of the test, one of the benchmarks for image quality improvement. They showed off some of the stuff in a slide. It was a little hard to see the details, but anyway, so they're targeting a lot of those areas. So overall, what do I make of this whole announcement? Again, I think one of the weirdest things is the pricing gap between the 9070 and 9070 XT makes the 9070 not make any sense. The 9070 will either drop price in the market if it's going to sell, or the 9070 XT will increase price in the market if the 9070 is selling at its price, because the $50 price gap doesn't seem to make sense. How all of this goes over in the real market, I think, again, it depends a lot on what the real world market pricing is for NVIDIA competitor cards. Because if a 5070 Ti is still costing like $1,000 on the actual market, and you can actually get a 9070 XT for around its MSRP of $600, then yeah, that's a massively better deal. Comparing MSRPs, like I said, a little bit less exciting. Anyway, they do have a bunch of other performance data, but it's the same stuff that was already leaked by videocards.com, and I've reported on pretty heavily on the channel. So, talking about their performance versus the GRE and all of that. So anyway, I'll definitely be following up a lot of coverage on anything else we learn about this. I'll have a lot of testing available myself on the channel, and it'll be really interesting to see how all of this plays out. I'm curious what you guys think in the comment section. Do these price points look good, assuming they can actually hit them, right? Is it enough? What do you think about the $50 price gap between the XT and the 9070? I'm worried that means that the 9070 XT's may not actually be available at that pricing because it doesn't appear to be any reference model here. This seems to be all third-party AIB cards. So are the AIB cards just going to be like, what? AMD's blindsiding us with the $599? They told us it was going to be $650 or $700, like that kind of a thing, and just being like, well, we're just going to price it what we were anyway. So much depends on the crazy pricing market right now on how I think this will actually be received. But like I said, it looks like they're intentionally targeting a lot of the places where they have been behind, and that's a good thing. Also looks like they didn't go with as bad of pricing as they could have or were maybe considering ahead of time, so at least there's that. Ended up with a bit of a weird pricing split in the end, though. Let me know what you guys think, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.